Has your team sucked? Are you struggling because of injuries? We got you covered here. We've got 13 guys that you need to consider on your waiver wires this week. Starting off with Miami Dolphins running back Devin Achane. When you look at his ownership on ESPN, Yahoo, and Sleeper, he's under 50%. And actually on ESPN, he's under 20%. Mostert was eating. Tyreek was eating. Achane was eating. Rob, how do we feel about this team going forward, and what are we doing with Achane on our roster?
I don't know, man. Like, I haven't seen an effort like that ever out of a team, and everybody who touched that ball was electric today. And Devon Achane, to me, coming out, blazing speed, nice combine, liked him a lot. The only thing I knocked him on a little bit was his speed. It looks like that offense is tailor-made to just leverage everyone who can fly. Mostert, Achane, Tyreek Hill. So if you have an opportunity to get a guy like Devon Achane onto your roster, I absolutely would. He's a guy that is going to be able to produce for you more often than not when he gets the ball in his hand. So I'm happy to have him on one of my rosters.
Yeah, and as long as Tua stays healthy and this team continues to be this way, I mean, they look like the team to beat right now. I mean, them in Kansas City, their offenses are starting to click. We saw it this week with Kansas City as well. So Achane is a guy that I feel good about rostering, and then based on matchups, obviously, you want to still kind of wait and see, right? Like, you don't want to just assume he's a set it and forget it type player. How much of your fab would you try to spend on this guy? Like, what percentage of money would you be willing to throw at a guy like Achane if he's available in your league?
That's a great question. I think it depends on who I am as a manager. If I'm, a guy who's had Chubb or Dobbins or Saquon or any of these guys that have hit me hard, I think I have to be a little bit more aggressive and throw some money at it. But I think in a vacuum, I'd be about 20% of my budget left over. I think I'd be comfortable with Achane. I just think he's going to give me a return on that investment.
Yeah, it feels like you're going to get some really nice boom weeks out of him like we saw this week. I mean, obviously they're not putting up 70 every week, right? You're feeling good with how they can leverage this offense and like you said, leverage these different pieces. I mean, you could see him easily have some nice weeks where he's getting, 100-plus yards and a touchdown, maybe every few weeks. And maybe every week he's just getting some good action as a PPR option. I mean, this is one of those guys that the way that they used him and the way that they've been using him every week so far has been really intriguing, especially rest of season with all these injuries. I mean, he's the name to get.
Yep.
Next up, Tank Dell from the Houston Texans. Now, if you were watching any of our live streams or checking on any of our waivers recently, Tank Dell's a name that I keep pounding the table for, and it keeps proving it. I mean, this guy's their big play threat. Now, Nico's still their top option, but teams look at Nico and double coverage him. Robert Woods they're covering, and then Tank Dell's wide open and able to really work that offense over. He's still less than 50% in all the major platforms that I already mentioned, and actually less than 25% over on ESPN. I'm a big Dell fan rest of the season. How do you feel about Dell?
Well, you're not the only one that was pounding the table for Nathan Tank Dell. CJ Stroud did as well at the draft, and now we're starting to find out why. So with the amount of times that Stroud has dropped back this season, with the proficiency that he has when he has been dropping back and how much Houston wants to throw the ball, Tank Dell is an easy add for me. He is fun to watch, and he's making the most of his opportunities. Like you said, he's their big play threat. He had some big plays today. He scored again today. If it wasn't for the fact that Achane went crazy today, I think Tank would probably be at the top of this list for us. So I 100% agree and think that he should be rostered almost everywhere at this point.
Yep, and I would almost consider, if you're struggling at receiver, or especially now that we're going to start hitting bye weeks, he's one of those guys that I would be very comfortable feeling a flexible option on a week-to-week basis, because he just keeps getting targeted, and he's their biggest play threat on this team. There is nobody else that can make a big play like he can make it. So I'm all for it. And if you guys have guys in your league, waiver wire questions, make sure you drop them in the comments. We love to get those questions, and we love to help you guys out. So if you hear somebody on here that you aren't sure about, ask us. We will gladly help you. Next up, Green Bay Packers, Romeo Dobbs. Now, this is a guy that had a great year last year as a rookie. We haven't seen Christian Watson this year, but they've got Jaden Reed. They've got Dontavian Wicks. And then Dobbs is kind of that guy that everyone assumes is their top option right now. Well, this week he had it, right? 12 targets, got you in the end zone. The team was struggling for most of the game, but then still looking for Dobbs this whole time. How do you feel about Dobbs, and where are you at with him? Is he a guy that you feel comfortable as a flex option going forward?
I'm certainly getting there if I'm not there already. So, he started the year a little bit banged up too. And week one was on a pitch count, but those pitches that he had, he scored twice. So, Jordan Love, it's been talked about all through the OTAs and the offseason programs and training camp that him and Romeo Dobbs, him and Romeo Dobbs, him and Romeo Dobbs. Well, I think we're starting to see that coming to fruition more often than not. And obviously, the Christian Watson injury and his inability to get into the lineup is magnifying that. But Romeo Dobbs has his quarterback's trust, and he's producing for him. So I don't see him being, targeted as often as, say, if Aaron Rodgers was still leading this offense. But the fact of the matter is it's the quality of targets that Romeo Dobbs seems to be getting. And yeah, very much like Tank Dell is a guy that I'd be comfortable sliding into my flex spot on a weekly basis with injuries piling up and bye weeks coming.
Yeah, and the reason that he makes this list is in the major platforms, it's 50%-ish and under. Sleeper, he's at 52%. This guy needs to be on every roster. I mean, there's just rostered in every league, I should say. There should be no reason he isn't on rosters.
Yeah.
If you need running back help, we got some more to help you. Next guy up on the list, running back Zach Charbonnet from the Seattle Seahawks. Now, obviously, week one, he didn't get much action, 3 carries. Then he jumped up to 4. He saw 9 this week against Carolina, got 46 yards. He started getting a little bit of targets in the passing game. This team is going to – it appears as though they're continuing to move him into a position where he can get a little more action so that they can keep Kenneth Walker healthy, right? Like, you don't want to give Walker too many carries. They can support 2 running backs. Going forward, how do you feel about Charbonnet and with teams that are in need of running back help? This is a really good option, wouldn't you think?
I do. And, like we talked about earlier, the running back position has been decimated pretty early in the first 2 weeks of the season. And now we're, 90-something% weight through week 3, and it looks like we're doing okay. In terms of this week, at least, it seemed to be somewhat common. I don't mean to jinx anything, but Charbonnet looked good today. And he did have limited work, but he caught the ball and he ran the ball and he looked like he had purpose. And I just think that there's an opportunity for him in this offense because I think Seattle will struggle a little bit in more games than not. They struggled for a lot of this game with Carolina. I'm not so sure that Geno is the quarterback that I thought he was coming into the season. And I'm not so sure that Seattle is as good as I thought they were, especially with the loss of their tackles early in the season. So I think they might need to diversify that offense a little bit, lean on both of their running backs a little bit more. And let's face it, with the running back landscape the way it is, even if Charbonnet is on your bench and you're just waiting for him to come during bye weeks and anything can happen, has to be rostered. So if he's out there in your league, I would recommend grabbing him for sure.
Yep. And his ownership is a little bit higher. He's between 40 and 60% in most of the formats that we've been looking into. So he is a little bit more, but he's still very available. I mean, that's a significant amount of leagues where you should be able to grab him. All right. Next up, we got some receivers for you. Now, obviously, we don't have full updates on Mike Williams, but he's going for an MRI, so we'll see what happens. But you definitely want to look at Josh Palmer, and we'll throw in Quentin Johnson, although Quentin Johnson, looking at his ownership numbers, was actually surprising. Josh Palmer, who's produced in the NFL, is rostered under 10% in most of the league formats, where Quentin Johnson's at 40 to 50% in most of the league formats, which was wild to me to think about it because Palmer's done a good job when given the opportunity. How do you feel about Palmer kind of sliding into that Mike Williams type role moving forward if that winds up being the case?
See, it gets a little bit confusing for me because Josh Palmer had I believe it was a nice end to the season last year or probably the year before. I cannot recall. But he's more of that sort of slot set of kind of wide receiver more so than out on the boundary like Mike Williams is. And that's why I think maybe Quentin Johnson does have a pretty good opportunity here because he is a little bit more of the body type and the type that I could see the Chargers just, sluggo 10 times a game and just let him run and catch the ball when Herbert flyers it down the field. When you look at the roster percentages, Johnston being rostered more than Palmer kind of makes sense because he's got the name recognition of being a first-round draft choice out of the rookie class this season. I think they're both worth a look, and I think that they're both going to be – it's a little challenging for me to say this is the guy I like over the other guy. Palmer seems to be the next man up in that offense, but I think Johnston's going to have that opportunity on the boundary, like I said, and I think it just depends on who they play each week as to who you're going to want. So if one or both of these guys are out there for you, take a look at your roster, see what works best for you, but I would add one at the very least.
Yep. And obviously, in a dynasty format, a rookie's probably already going to be rostered. Like, that doesn't surprise me, which is why
For sure.
you'll see some of like Sleeper's numbers are skewed because Sleeper does a lot of dynasty. Well, both these guys need to be in consideration. All right, next up, we've got another running back. And actually, this week he outproduced Derrick Henry. We got TaiJ Spears from the Tennessee Titans. We've seen Spears involved every week, right? This week, the only reason he really outproduced Derrick Henry is he actually got receptions. He had 4 targets, caught 4 for a whopping 3 yards, had 4 carries for 6 yards. Derrick Henry had 11 carries for 20 yards. I mean, Cleveland gobbled up these running backs and really didn't leave much to be desired. But we've had TaiJ Spears, the guys you need to consider having on your roster, especially depending on how deep your leagues are, for a few weeks now, and we want to keep bringing it up because his ownership is so low. 16, 24, 32. These are the numbers of the roster ownership across the major platforms. Spears can get involved in the passing game and looks to be a guy that they're beginning to trust a little bit more. What do you think happens rest of the season with this backfield?
I don't know. And I know that's not a very good answer, and I'm supposed to have an answer for you, but Derrick Henry's 29 years old, and he looks like he's 92 years old the way he's played the last few weeks. He's got a bad toe. Toes can be very, very tricky and very hard to play with because it's a pain tolerance thing more than anything else. So I don't know what the situation there is. That offense is broken. It's not working very well, and they're going to be trailing a lot. And TaiJ Spears is the guy that's going to be on the field when they're trailing. And he's most likely going to do better than 4 catches for 3 yards or whatever it was that you said. He needs to be rostered. And honestly, when I saw those numbers, like 16, 24, 32, I thought to myself, is he available in my leagues? And I need to go and get him because just for those reasons, because he's going to be on the field. Derrick Henry looks like he's finally at the cliff and hanging off of it. I don't think Spears necessarily replaces Derrick Henry, but he's probably more of a complement and more of a 50-50 guy than we originally would have thought at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, with the team being behind, and you want that pass-catching running back because dump-offs are a big part of the league anymore. I mean, if they can even get little chunk plays, get guys out in space, just the way it works. So I'm with you on that one. All right, next up, we want to talk about another receiver, Rasheed Rice from the Kansas City Chiefs. Ownership is still significantly low because, let's be honest, everybody's trying to figure out who the receiver is to target. Everyone thought it was Tony. Tony's been all over the place. Sky Moore's been a little bit more trustworthy. Rasheed Rice has had 5 targets week 1, 2 targets last week, 7 targets this week. He kept getting so close to the end zone. He's got 1 touchdown so far this year. I mean, this guy looks like he should continue to develop rapport, and it looks like Mahomes likes him. I mean, he's targeting him in some really tight windows and hitting him with the ball, and it's looking good for Rice. So if you need receiver help or depth for potential flex bye weeks, I mean, this is an intriguing option. What do you think about Rasheed Rice?
I think it's never a bad idea to roster a guy that catches passes from Patrick Mahomes right off the hop. To your point, I think he was tackled at the 1 twice today. Obviously, it'd be a bit of a different discussion if he'd have punched both of those in, and I thought the first one he was in, the second one not so much. He seems to really excel against teams that like to play zone defenses, and he seems to really have a knack for settling down inside the soft part of those zones, and Mahomes sees them and hits them. So it seems rather simplistic, and I don't know. I'd have to go back and look to see if the targets were high in weeks against predominantly zone played defenses versus man coverage. I don't know, but yeah, man, like Rasheed Rice is a quality wide receiver in an offense that's going to pop off. It might be a little bit ebb and flow as to which receiver has the big day in that offense. But like I said, if I'm putting a Kansas City wide receiver on the field and Patrick Mahomes is the quarterback, I'm totally fine with that.
Right. And, and it bears talking about Jerick McKinnon because he had a day today, right? Like, this is what Jerick McKinnon does to fantasy owners. You probably need to have him on a roster because he'll have weeks like this, and then you're going to see long stretches where, he gets you 3, 4, 5 points because he doesn't get much but a couple receptions. The big thing here is that he's really strong PPR option in the Kansas City offense. Is Jerick McKinnon, because there's such a struggle with these running backs with injuries, isn't McKinnon a guy that you feel comfortable using as a flex option because we know he's going to get a couple targets a game and maybe he turns some of those into big plays?
Some weeks, yes, some weeks, no. And again, that's another cop-out answer. But I think in a week like this where Isaiah Pacheco was a little bit banged up coming in, I thought maybe McKinnon would get a little bit more run. The one thing that Jarek McKinnon seems to have done in his time in Kansas City is really amp up his game, and his usage gets amped up the later we get into the season. So I'm more than happy to put Jarek McKinnon onto my bench and just let him sit there, and in case of emergency, break glass with him, or just wait until we get later on into the season when Patrick Mahomes wants to, give him those dump offs like he did today, which he seems to do later in the season and into the playoffs. So a guy I want to roster, and I'm just going to pick my spots as to when I think it's going to be advantageous for me to put him in my lineup.
I agree. All right, so next up, on the other side of that Miami slobber knocker was a Denver Broncos team that utilized a lot of Courtland Sutton, is still trying to get Jerry Jeudy work back from the injury, and then Marvin Mims. This is their big play threat right now. I mean, this guy, obviously this week got 5 targets, caught 3 for 73, got you, some, if you use return yards in your leagues, I mean, he was big in the return game. He's the big play threat in this offense, and it looks like they're going to have to pass the ball a bunch. So moving forward, Mims is a guy that if you're struggling and you're in deeper leagues and you need a wide receiver to stash and see what happens, Mims is an intriguing option. What do you think about him in this offense moving forward?
Lost in this game because one team scored 70 times, or 70 points, I should say. It felt like they scored 70 times. Russell Wilson threw for over 300 yards again, and Denver moved the ball again. I think what the biggest surprise to me is Denver's defense is just leaking like crazy. But hey, as a fantasy manager, I guess I kind of like that because Russell Wilson's being forced to throw the football a little bit more. Jerry Jeudy's still ramping back up into what we all believe he can be. Courtland Sutton had a nice game today, but Marvin Mims is a relevant piece in that offense. And to your point, he's probably their big play guy. He had a couple of really nice plays today. And what impressed me the most about him was what he did with the ball in his hands after the catch. He is electric and he can move. So again, another guy that, 9%, 26, and 27% roster percentages is too low for me. I'd like to see him in 12-team leagues owned a lot more than that. So I would add Marvin Mims if I had a spot for sure.
Well, and the crazy thing, this is now 2 weeks in a row where he's got you double-digit fantasy points. And obviously 2 weeks ago it was 2 catches for like 113 yards and a touchdown. But it doesn't really matter how you get the points, right? Like if it's just 2 big plays, totally. 5 catches, whatever the case may be, this is a guy that definitely needs to be on rosters because he has that big play potential. And teams are down, they're going to need big plays. Big play threats are really intriguing options.
Great.
All right, so next up, we're going to give you tight end. This is a guy that folks have been kind of down on for some reason. It seems like Gerald Everett from the Los Angeles Chargers, under 40% ownership in the major platforms, but is still their top option. I know Donald Parham continues to get action, right? But he's getting, 1-2 targets around the goal line, which goal line threats are a big deal. But Gerald Everett's continuing to get a significant amount of targets. And if Mike Williams is out, that could bump Gerald Everett into a little bit more of a significant role. We saw 3 targets week 1, 3 targets week 2, 6 targets this week, so we're starting to see something here that maybe Gerald Everett gets you that kind of back-end startable tight end as we move into bye weeks that I want to take a chance at because this LA offense is pretty high-powered. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, I watched this whole game, unfortunately. But I will say Donald Parham caught 2 touchdown passes today, and I believe those were his only 2 receptions, and he probably had 4 yards receiving. So that's what he did, and good for him. And if you had him in your lineup today, nice. But when they needed a third down conversion and they needed something in tight, there was 2 options in that offense all day long. It was Keenan Allen and it was Gerald Everett. And Everett works hard with the ball in his hands, and he's really athletic, and he can get you some yards after the catch. So I think he's a guy I've always liked, and he's a guy that I believe you should have. If you're sitting there struggling and frustrated with Darren Waller, you're frustrated with Kyle Pitts, or you're frustrated with 85% of the tight ends that play in this league, David Njoku, the list goes on and on and on. I'm not saying get rid of those players, but this is a nice guy you can add relatively easily to your lineup, and you could probably plug him in here with Mike Williams most likely being out, and Austin Eckler, potentially with their early bye, them holding him out until they get through that. So Everett's going to have some opportunities here in the next little while, so he would not be a guy I would ignore on my waiver wire.
100% agree. All right, we want to bring up, and I know this is from Thursday, but the Giants continue to target Paris Campbell. If you need some wide receiver help, I know that he hasn't produced huge, right? But 4 targets, 6 targets, 6 targets. I mean, at some point, this offense is going to begin to start clicking better, and it looks like this guy's up near the top of the target getters for the receivers on this team. So if you're looking for somebody to stash, because right now you can't really trust the Giants offense 100% just yet. We're still trying to figure out what's going on with this offense. You want this guy because he's getting a bunch of targets, and he's got that big play ability. We've seen it. He's got the speed, and it looks like they're targeting him. What do you think about Campbell and even the Giants offense as a whole moving forward?
It's going to be better. Like Brian Daboll's a pretty smart guy, and I just think that for whatever reason, Daniel Jones is struggling a bit to the point where he's throwing the ball too high, first of all. But the biggest knock on Paris Campbell back to his Colts days, and even with the Giants, is not his talent, not his ability. It's his health. And he seems to have, knock on wood, shaken that and been relatively healthy the last little bit. He was fairly healthy last season, had obviously the best year of his career because he played more than 2 games. But nonetheless, he's a guy that can then help Daniel Jones out. He's smart enough and savvy enough to know when to come back to the ball. He can do a lot of good things in the slot to get you first downs and move the chain. So, look, we're 11 guys deep here, or 12 guys deep in our waiver run for a reason, but Paris Campbell still has value. You might have Mike Williams, and you just lost a wide receiver that was in your lineup, and you might play in 14, 16-team leagues. These are guys that have value that need to be looked at. So I'm not going to go crazy with my fab and go out of my way to add Paris Campbell, but no denying he's viable for sure.
Absolutely. Another guy that's viable is this rookie from Indianapolis, Josh Downs. 7 targets week 1, 5 targets week 2. Those are both with Anthony Richardson. And then this week with Gardner Minshew, 12 targets, caught 8 of them, 57 yards. In a PPR format, I mean, it's undeniable that this Colts offense, with a guy like Josh Downs, I mean, he's kind of their in-the-middle slot type guy. This could be a valuable position to have. If you don't have the ability to get a Michael Pittman, this is a nice piece to go after because they're going to keep targeting him. And he does a good job. I mean, he's got good hands and he's done a good job receiving. I would be okay with looking at him. And if you're struggling to try to figure out kind of how to value some of these guys, I would be okay with him above Paris Campbell if you need a receiver that you're pretty comfortable starting in a flex position because of injuries. But what are you doing with him rest of the season? How do you feel about Josh Downs in this Colts offense?
I like Josh Downs, and I liked him in North Carolina, and I liked him coming into the league, and I thought that Indy was a good spot for him to land. I'm surprised that he's been targeted as much as he has been with Anthony Richardson. With Gardner Minshew, it doesn't surprise me really that much at all. But that just goes to show you that talent earns targets, and he's getting targeted regardless of who the quarterback is under center. And Josh Downs has the ability to do some stuff with those targets. Like, you're right. Michael Pittman is the number one in that offense. I think their tight end position is a little bit up in the air, and they're not really sure who it is from week to week. Their running game is suspect. Zach Moss is, I will admit, done quite well for a guy I didn't think would do that great. But then Josh Downs is the next best, or if not better, talent in that offense. So he's going to stay involved. And again, I agree with you. I think maybe I would have him above Paris Campbell here, but it's close. And it's, again, more of that 14, 16 team league depth add flex guy for me. But again, every league is different. Every team is different. And some guy might have an opportunity to add Josh Downs because he's just had some really weird bad luck at wide receiver and needs to add someone. So definitely someone that you should have a look at for, yeah.
Yeah. And I want to add on to this at the receiver position, DJ Chark. He's healthy. He's back. Who knows how long he stays healthy and stays back, but with Andy Dalton leading this offense, he got 11 targets, caught 4 for 86 and a touchdown. You could do worse at the receiver position, right? Like DJ Chark is a big play option, struggles to stay healthy, yes. But with what they were doing in Carolina, they're going to need to throw the ball. They're going to need somebody that can make a big play. Adam Thielen is a chain mover at this point in his career. Some of the young guys, Mingo got hurt, if I remember recalling. I didn't see how significant it was, but dinged up. Terrace Marshall still has not really done much. DJ Chark is probably one of their most veteran, trustable receivers. How do you feel about if you're struggling at receiver, grabbing a guy like Chark and rostering him?
I think I feel okay grabbing him and rostering him. I think it's where it becomes challenging with DJ Chark is when to start him. This is a good opportunity for him to play today. And there's no denying, again, DJ Chark is another guy that is a talented wide receiver who has struggled with health. But I think he needs to be in those opportunities where, the team's not the greatest against the number 2 wide receiver in the offense. And that's kind of what Seattle is, right? Seattle does an okay job taking away your number 1, and it falls off rather quickly after that. So I think he's matchup dependent, but he's their big play guy. Like we talked about Marvin Mims being that for Detroit. He's definitely that for Carolina. And in all honesty, if Andy Dalton stays under center longer, I like him a lot more than I do if they go back to their rookie quarterback for sure.
Yeah. And we want to give you a quarterback. So looking through some of the ownership, I was really surprised that CJ Stroud is under 35-40% ownership. I know rookie quarterback struggled week 1, but has continued to progress, is looking more comfortable, is moving around a little bit more, is able to get out of the pocket. I mean, this week he hasn't really done a lot rushing-wise, right? Like 2-3 attempts each game, but he's starting to throw the ball more, is starting to have trust with a guy that we mentioned earlier, Tank Dell, Robert Woods, Nico Collins. I mean, he's starting to take over and take command of this offense and looks really intriguing. Now, the next month he's got a tough slate, dealing with Pittsburgh, Atlanta, New Orleans. They got a bye, and then they got Carolina. Not the strongest games, but if you need quarterback help and you're struggling because you got Joe Burrow or you've got some of these guys that have been injured, you had Aaron Rodgers and you're trying to figure out what to do. CJ Stroud is a guy that it looks like he's moving in the right direction. This offense is going with him. How do you feel about CJ Stroud?
When I look at guys like, wide receivers and running backs, I look for guys that are going to touch the football. Well, at the quarterback position, I look for guys that are going to throw the football, and Stroud is throwing the football amongst the leaders in the league. His dropbacks are off the charts. His attempts and his completions are right up there, and you're bang on when it comes to Tank Dell, Nico Collins, all the other assets in that offense, and he's producing. So if I had Aaron Rodgers, if I'm struggling with Joe Burrow, if I'm, a little bit worried about Justin Fields, if I'm a little bit worried about Geno Smith, guys like that we thought were going to be a little bit more prevalent at the higher parts of the quarterback rankings, I think CJ Stroud's worth adding to my roster. Now, is he a weekly starter for me? Probably not in a 1 quarterback format, but he's absolutely a guy that in the right spots can have a big week. So, and we just saw that. So he is one of the quarterbacks this week that I've been looking to add. Absolutely.